The lesson of limitations. The alien academy floated high above the world of Arkan in a silver tower that glowed against the dark sky like a beacon of knowledge. Inside its grand halls, young cadets from dozens of species gathered to learn about biology and survival, lessons meant to prepare them for exploration and war. The lecture chamber was circular, its walls covered with glowing screens that showed images of countless creatures. In the center stood Professor Kethron, a tall reptilian scholar with scales that shimmered under the light. His voice was sharp and cold as he addressed the eager students who filled the seats around him. Today's lesson was about regeneration and healing, subjects the alien students found fascinating because many species across the galaxy possessed strange ways of repairing themselves. Professor Kethron raised one long finger and tapped the screen where diagrams of different species appeared. He spoke of lizards from his homeworld that could regrow tails, of insectoids who could rebuild shattered limbs, of aquatic beings who could even regrow half their organs. Then the image on the screen shifted and displayed the figure of a human. A tall frame, 2 arms, 2 legs, pale skin compared to the other creatures, nothing that seemed remarkable. The professor's voice carried a note of disdain as he declared that humans were fragile and weak, their bodies incapable of regrowing tissue once it was lost. They scarred instead, leaving ugly marks that showed their limitations. His words made several alien students laugh and chatter, amused that such a species still dared to explore the stars. Among the crowd sat a single human cadet named Ethan. He wore the dark uniform of the academy, and his short hair was neat, but his eyes remained calm and distant as the laughter echoed around him. He had grown used to it over the months, the way other species mocked humans as fragile and unworthy. He sat quietly, his back straight, his hands folded, but beneath his uniform, his skin carried a secret map of scars that none of them knew about. The professor continued, explaining that humans could not compare to the strength of species who rebuilt themselves after injuries. He called humans a species that survived only by luck and tools, not by biology. Ethan felt the words strike him, like stones, but he did not move or speak. His mind drifted back to his past, to memories that were not written in any textbook. He remembered the burning wreck of a shuttle crash where steel had torn through his side and left a wound so deep the doctors believed he would die. He remembered lying in a hospital bed with pain tearing at every breath, yet somehow he healed enough to walk again. He remembered battles on Earth's dead continents where wild beasts had clawed him, leaving marks that he carried forever. Yet he had kept fighting until the beasts fell. Each scar told a story of survival, not weakness, but the professor would never know unless Ethan chose to show them. The aliens laughed louder when one student, a horned creature from the world of Vakros, raised his hand and asked mockingly if humans screamed when they were cut, if they cried when they bled. The professor answered with a cruel smile, saying yes, humans felt pain more sharply than most species and often collapsed before the fight was finished. Ethan felt the eyes turn toward him, waiting to see if he would defend himself, but he kept his gaze steady. He would not waste words on them. Words could not explain what it meant to live through wounds that should have ended him. Only proof could silence them. As the lecture continued, Ethan's heart beat with quiet determination. He could feel the weight of his scars pressing against him, reminders of his strength hidden under cloth. The professor closed the lesson by stating that humans were creatures of limitation, unable to heal properly, doomed to carry weakness wherever they went. The chamber rang with alien voices agreeing, convinced they had learned the truth. Ethan stood as the others filed out, his expression calm but his mind burning with resolve. He knew the time would come when he would have to show them what the textbooks never wrote, that humans did not need to regrow lost flesh to prove their power. They healed in ways no alien could understand, and when that truth was revealed, the laughter would die, the whisper of doubt. The next day, the academy halls buzzed with the usual life of students moving between classes and training arenas. Bright banners from a dozen worlds hung along the corridors, showing the pride of species that believed themselves strong and enduring. Ethan walked through the crowd with steady steps, his face calm, but his thoughts heavy. He could still hear the echo of the professor's words about human weakness and the mocking laughter that followed. For most of the students, it was just another lesson, something to memorize for tests and move on. But for Ethan, it was something deeper, something personal. He carried scars the professor would never imagine, and with every step he felt them hidden, beneath his uniform like secret flames, the alien students whispered when he passed. Some smirked openly, others nudged their companions and made jokes in languages they thought he could not understand. One Vicrosian muttered loudly that it was amazing such soft flesh had ever survived leaving its homeworld. Ethan ignored them, but inside he remembered nights back on Earth where survival was not a choice but a demand. He remembered crawling through broken stone after a bombing during training exercises, his leg bleeding heavily while the medics were hours away. He had tied his own wound with torn cloth and dragged himself until he found shelter, refusing to give in to the darkness of pain. Days later, the doctors shook their heads in disbelief, calling him stubborn beyond reason, yet his wound closed and left another mark across his thigh. That scar was still there, a reminder that healing was more than the return of flesh. Some of the alien students began to doubt the certainty of the professor's claim. They had seen humans in simulations and in competitions and noticed that, despite their fragile appearance, they often lasted longer than expected. A chittering insectoid cadet whispered to his friend that humans might not regrow tissue, but they refused to fall when injured, and that perhaps was another kind of regeneration. Others dismissed the thought quickly, laughing again because the textbooks had always been clear. Still, the whisper of doubt began to spread slowly like a hidden current beneath the surface of the academy's chatter. Ethan spent his evenings in the training hall, pushing his body until sweat covered his skin and his muscles burned. He struck the practice dummies again and again, remembering the pain of every old injury. He did not train only to become stronger. He trained to remind himself that his body had endured and would endure again. Every scar that stretched when he moved was proof of his survival. The alien cadets who watched him from the shadows noticed the intensity in his eyes. He was not training like a student eager for marks. He was training like a warrior, carrying old ghosts that refused to leave. One night as he left the hall, a group of alien cadets blocked his path. Their leader, the horned Vicrosian who had mocked him in class, stepped forward with a sneer and challenged him openly. He claimed that humans were cowards and that Ethan should prove otherwise in a duel. The other aliens cheered at the idea, eager to see the human fall and bleed. Ethan looked at them calmly, his heart steady, and accepted without hesitation. He knew this moment was coming, and perhaps it was the chance to show them the truth. The duel was scheduled for the end of the week in the central arena where every student could watch. That night, Ethan returned to his quarters and sat alone in silence. He removed his uniform top and looked at himself in the mirror. His chest and arms carried the marks of a life lived on the edge of death. Jagged lines from blades, burn marks from fires, deep ridges from claws. Each scar seemed to whisper to him, reminding him of the moments when he should have fallen but did not. He touched one across his ribs where shrapnel had once torn through, and he remembered the doctor saying no man should have walked away from that wound. Yet he had, and here he stood. He knew the aliens would expect him to collapse quickly under their strikes, but he also knew his body and his spirit would not allow it. His scars were not just memories, they were his armor. They were the truth hidden from the galaxy, a truth the professor's books would never tell. As the night grew quiet and the stars outside shone over the academy tower, Ethan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The time had come, and soon the whispers of doubt would grow into something far louder. Soon they would understand what it meant to be human. The mockery grows. The announcement of the duel spread quickly through the academy, and soon every corridor buzzed with excitement because a challenge between species always attracted attention. And this time the human cadet was at the center of it all. The alien students whispered and laughed as they passed Ethan, calling him soft flesh and fragile bones. Some even placed wagers on how many seconds he would last before falling to the ground. The horned Vicrosian challenger named Korath trained openly in the arena, boasting loudly that he would crush the human with one strike, and that the lesson would end as it began, with the proof that humans were weak. Ethan walked through the mockery, Without a word, his face calm, but his mind sharpening with quiet focus. The professor himself watched with interest, though he maintained his mask of disdain. He told the class that the duel would be educational, and that the humans' defeat would show the importance of biology over willpower. The students laughed again, believing they were about to see a fragile creature exposed before them. The arena was prepared with its smooth stone floor and glowing barriers to prevent serious death, though the injuries would still be real and painful. The seats filled quickly, with dozens of species eager for the spectacle. As the days passed before the duel, Ethan continued his training alone. His body ached with every movement, but he welcomed the pain because it reminded him of every trial he had endured. He remembered running through burning forests on Earth, his lungs filled with smoke, his skin blistering as fire licked at him. He remembered being dragged half-conscious from a collapsed bunker with blood in his mouth and rubble crushing his chest. He remembered the long nights when he lay awake in recovery rooms staring at ceilings while doctors whispered that he should never have survived. Each memory gave him strength, and each scar on his body spoke louder than the taunts of the students Korath on. The other hand trained before an audience, enjoying the cheers of his fellow cadets. He swung heavy weapons through the air, his horned head lifted high as he promised to bring the human down quickly and leave him in the dirt. The laughter that followed echoed across the halls, and Ethan heard it everywhere he went. Yet he did not respond, not with anger, not with fear. He held his silence because he knew words could not prove anything. Only endurance could. On the eve of the duel, the tension reached its peak. Students filled the mess halls with arguments about how long Ethan could possibly last. Some said 1 blow, others said 3. None believed he could hold out more than a minute. Even those who doubted the textbooks whispered only in private, unwilling to risk being mocked themselves. The professor gave his final lecture before the event, and once again he reminded everyone that humans lacked regeneration and were doomed by their biology. The words hung heavy in the air, and Ethan sat, still his eyes fixed forward but his heart burning quietly with a fire no one could see. That night Ethan returned once more to his quarters. He removed his shirt and studied the map of scars across his body. His fingers brushed over the deep mark on his side where steel had pierced him years before. He traced the long jagged line down his arm where a beast had slashed him in the wilds. He looked at himself not with shame, but with pride. For every scar was proof that the professor's lesson was incomplete and that the laughter of the cadets was built on ignorance. He whispered to himself that tomorrow he would show them what humans truly were, not creatures of weakness but survivors who turned pain into strength. The morning came quickly, and the arena was filled with voices chanting for Korath. The alien warrior strode proudly into the center, his horns gleaming under the light, and his heavy frame moving with confidence. Then Ethan stepped forward, quiet and steady. No weapon in, his hands, his face unreadable. The crowd jeered and laughed, but Ethan did not flinch. He walked to the center and met the eyes of his opponent. The mockery grew louder than ever, but deep inside, Ethan felt calm. He had faced worse than this. He had faced death itself, and he was still standing. Now he would face them all and show the truth that no one could deny. The fight and the wound. The arena lights flared bright as the duel began, and the voices of the crowd thundered in unison. Some cheered Korath's name while others laughed openly at the human who stood calm and steady with no armor beyond his uniform and no weapon but his hands. The horned Vacrosian loomed large, his muscles rippling under his scaled skin, his horns sharp like spears. He raised his massive training blade and let out a roar that shook the chamber. Ethan did not move. He simply fixed his eyes on his opponent with the quiet determination of a man who had already faced worse than this moment. The signal was given and Korath charged across the arena, his heavy steps making the stone floor tremble. He swung the blade down with all his strength, expecting the human to dodge or collapse beneath its force. Ethan shifted just enough to avoid the killing strike, but the edge caught his shoulder and tore through flesh. Blood sprayed across the arena floor and the crowd roared with excitement, believing the duel would be finished in seconds. Ethan staggered, but he did not fall. He gritted his teeth and steadied his breath, his body refusing to yield to the pain. Korath laughed and pressed the attack. His blade slashed again and again, striking Ethan across the ribs and the leg. Each cut opened new wounds and crimson stained his uniform. The professor, watching from the high platform, nodded with smug satisfaction, as if his lesson was being proven before everyone. The students shouted with glee, yelling that the human was finished. But Ethan kept standing. His chest rose and fell heavily, his arms trembling from the strain, yet his eyes never left his opponent. The pain coursed through him like fire, but with every strike he remembered. He remembered the firestorm on Earth when a wall collapsed and crushed his body, leaving him broken yet alive. He remembered the sharp claws of a beast tearing his back and the long recovery that followed. He remembered the shrapnel that had sliced into his side, leaving him barely breathing. Yet somehow he had walked again. Each memory filled him with iron. Each scar, now hidden under his blood-stained uniform, whispered that he had endured worse than this. Dual Korath grew frustrated because the human would not fall. He shouted angrily and delivered a brutal blow that sent Ethan crashing to the ground. The crowd erupted in laughter and triumph. But before the echo faded, Ethan planted his hands on the stone floor and pushed himself back to his feet. Blood ran down his arm and leg, but he stood tall. His chest heaved, but his spirit refused to bend. The crowd grew quieter now, watching with disbelief. Korath snarled and lunged again, his blade cutting across Ethan's side and opening a deep wound. The pain was sharp, like lightning, and for a moment the world spun, but Ethan clenched his jaw and steadied himself. He could feel the warm flow of blood soaking his uniform, but his body refused to surrender. He took a step forward instead of back. His fists clenched, not to strike, but to show that he was still present, still unbroken. The alien. Students who had mocked him leaned forward now, their laughter fading into silence. Every step Ethan took was an act of defiance. Every breath was a challenge to the lies written in the textbooks. His vision blurred from blood loss, but his will sharpened beyond anything the arena had ever seen. Korath struck once more, a heavy swing meant to end it, but Ethan caught the blow with his arm, though it tore deep into flesh, and he stood firm. The crowd gasped for the first time because the human should have collapsed long ago. Instead, he looked at his opponent through pain-filled eyes that still held fire. The duel did not belong to strength or speed anymore. It belonged to endurance. It belonged to the will to rise when the body screamed to fall. Ethan's blood stained the stone floor. His body shook with exhaustion, yet his spirit towered higher than the horns of Korath. The crowd that had come to laugh now watched in stunned silence as the human endured blow after blow, refusing to let the fight end the way they had all expected. The professor himself leaned forward, his cold confidence beginning to crack. Ethan's voice finally broke the silence, low and steady, despite the pain. He told Korath that humans did not fight to prove power, they fought to prove survival. His words echoed through the arena, and every scar beneath his uniform seemed to speak with him. The duel was not finished, but the truth was already unfolding before their eyes. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was unyielding, and Ethan would stand until the last breath left his body. The scars revealed. The arena was hushed now as Ethan stood in the center, his body bleeding from several wounds, yet still upright. Korath snarled and demanded that the human collapse, but Ethan's legs, though shaking, held him steady. The crowd that had mocked him only moments before now leaned forward in silence, unable to look away from the sight of a man who should have been broken long ago. Ethan's chest heaved, with heavy breaths, and pain burned through every cut, yet his spirit pushed him onward. And it was that spirit that froze the crowd, more than his strength. Korath raised his weapon again, but Ethan lifted a hand and spoke, his voice firm, though strained. He told him enough. That simple word echoed strangely through the chamber, and for the first time Korath hesitated. His horns lowered as he prepared for another charge, but Ethan instead reached up and gripped the torn remains of his uniform. Slowly, with deliberate movement, he pulled the blood-soaked cloth away from his body until his chest and arms were bare under the harsh arena light. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as the truth of his body was revealed. Across his chest ran jagged scars, thick ridges of healed flesh that crossed over one another like rivers carved through stone. His shoulders bore the marks of deep wounds, long ago closed, His ribs were marked by a scar that cut from one side to the other so severe that it seemed impossible any being could have survived it. His back carried the faint lines of burns that told of fire trying to consume him. His arms carried smaller scars from blades, claws, and shrapnel. Every inch of his body was a story written not in words but in flesh. The crowd fell silent in awe. The professor himself leaned forward, eyes narrowing as if trying to reconcile what he saw with the words of his textbooks. The alien students who had laughed earlier could not laugh now. Their eyes traced every scar, and with each mark they began to understand something their lessons had never taught them. Ethan stood tall, though blood still dripped from fresh wounds, and his voice carried across the chamber as he told them that humans did not regrow tissue, the way some species did, but they regrew something far more powerful. They regrew strength when broken. They regrew hope when despair struck. They carried wounds, not as weakness, but as proof that they refused to die. Korath lowered his blade and stared at Ethan with wide eyes. The arrogance that had filled him only moments ago began to fade as he realized that the human before him had faced more battles and more pain than he could imagine. Ethan pointed to the scar across his chest and explained how shrapnel had torn him open and left him gasping on the ground. Yet he had walked again. He pointed to the scar on his arm where a beast had clawed him and told how he had fought until it fell. He traced the burns on his back and remembered. The firestorm that should have ended him yet did not. Each scar was a testament to defiance against death itself. The alien students whispered to one another now. But it was not mockery. It was disbelief mixed with a strange sense of respect. They had never considered scars as anything but failure. Yet here was a man standing alive stronger because of them. Their textbooks had described humans as fragile creatures unable to heal properly. But the truth standing before them was that scars were not fragility. They were survival carved permanently into flesh. Ethan lifted his chin and told them that scars were human regeneration, not of tissue, but of will. The professor tried to recover his authority and declared that scars only proved damage. But even as he spoke, his voice trembled slightly because he could not ignore the fact that Ethan was still standing after wounds that would have left many species dead on the floor. His own eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt as he looked upon the scar that cut so deeply across Ethan's chest. The silence of the crowd spoke louder than any protest. The cadets looked at Ethan with new eyes, no longer as a weak being, but as a mystery of survival. Ethan took a slow step forward and spread, his arms showing every scar to every corner of the arena. His voice grew louder, not in anger, but in truth. He told them that humans did not escape pain. They embraced it and carried it forward. He told them that scars were not signs of defeat. They were signs of battles won. His words rolled across the chamber, heavy and undeniable. The crowd listened in silence, their laughter gone, replaced by something closer to reverence. In that moment, the duel was no longer about victory or defeat. It was about revelation. Ethan had shown them the truth that their books had hidden. He had shown them that scars were not ugly marks of weakness, but proof that humans had a different kind of healing, one born not from biology, but from indomitable will. The professor lowered his gaze, unable to challenge the reality before him, and even Korath lowered his weapon, unwilling to strike again. The human stood, bloodied, scarred, and unbroken. And in that sight, the galaxy's lessons about humanity began, to change lessons rewritten. The chamber remained silent as Ethan's scars glistened under the harsh lights and the air seemed heavy with disbelief. The professor struggled to maintain his composure as he realized that every lecture he had delivered about human fragility was now being shattered before his eyes. The students no longer whispered mockingly. Instead, they leaned forward, their eyes wide with awe and curiosity, trying to comprehend how a being so wounded could stand so tall. The human warrior had turned the lesson upside down, and no alien textbook could explain what they were witnessing. Ethan slowly walked toward the center of the arena, each step deliberate yet heavy with pain. The fresh wounds on his body throbbed, but he ignored them, for he knew the lesson he was giving was more important than his own discomfort. He raised his arms and gestured to his body. The network of scars etched across his chest. Arms and back were like a map of survival telling stories that no language could capture. Korath stepped back, unsure of how to react. For the first time he questioned whether strength was measured in size or in endurance, and the human before him had just proven a measure of will stronger than any blade or weapon. The professor finally found his voice, though it trembled slightly. He attempted to assert authority by saying that textbooks had not mentioned such extraordinary regenerative abilities. But even as the words left his lips, he could not deny the reality in front of him. He looked at the scars and saw resilience he had never expected to witness. He saw a pattern of survival that transcended biology, and in that moment he realized that his understanding of humans had been incomplete, and perhaps even arrogant. Alien students began to murmur amongst themselves. The whispers now carried curiosity and respect rather than ridicule. They moved closer to observe the details of the scars, the way some twisted over joints, and others ran deep across the ribs. It was evident that each mark had healed fully, yet told of battles that should have ended the human's life. They began to ask questions about the speed of recovery, the methods humans used, and the endurance of their bodies. Ethan answered them not with pride but with quiet explanation. He told them that humans were not born invincible, nor did they escape injury easily, but their strength came from refusing to surrender to pain. And every scar was a reminder of a battle fought and survived. Korath's eyes followed Ethan as he demonstrated how he could still lift heavy weights and perform precise movements despite the injuries that marked his body. The professor watched intently, realizing that he had to rewrite his lectures, that what he thought of as limitations were in fact unique forms of adaptation and perseverance. The students took notes feverishly, though many could barely keep up with the unfolding reality. They began to sketch the patterns of scars, comparing them to wounds inflicted in simulations and real encounters, yet nothing in their studies could replicate the human capacity to endure and continue fighting. Ethan spoke again, his voice steady and commanding as he addressed the professor directly. He told him that understanding humanity required looking beyond textbooks, beyond theories. It required seeing survival as a choice and endurance as a measure of character. He explained that humans did not just heal tissue, they rebuilt confidence, they restored hope, they transformed pain into fuel for the next challenge. The chamber was silent save for the echoes of his words and the sound of alien students' hearts racing as they tried to internalize the lesson. By the time Ethan lowered his arms, the atmosphere had changed completely. The mocking laughter and whispers of disbelief were gone, replaced by reverent silence and deep contemplation. The professor, who had once believed he knew everything about human physiology, now sat down in a rare moment of humility, realizing that every assumption he had made was now being questioned. He could see the truth, that humans were not weak creatures to be studied from a distance, but formidable beings whose resilience could rewrite the understanding of survival across the galaxy. Korath, who had come to dominate the duel with arrogance, now stepped back with a mixture of fear and respect. The human had not only survived, but had imposed a lesson on them all, one that no alien could have anticipated. His scars were not just marks of injury, they were emblems of a species that refused to surrender. His presence had rewritten the lesson plan of the Academy and had set a precedent that would be remembered for generations. The students stared at Ethan with new eyes, their respect and admiration growing with each passing moment. They realized that the human before them was not just a warrior, but a living lesson, a walking embodiment of determination and survival. The professor finally rose and nodded, acknowledging that he had been proven wrong, and that from this day forward the way humans were taught in the Academy would change forever, for scars were no longer signs of weakness, but proof of strength, proof of the enduring power of will, and proof that the galaxy had underestimated humanity in ways that would echo across the stars. The legacy of scars. The arena was quiet, yet charged with a new energy, as Ethan stood at its center, his body still bearing the marks of countless battles, yet radiating a quiet strength that no alien could ignore. The students gathered around him, eyes wide with awe and curiosity. their previous doubts replaced by fascination and respect. Every movement he made seemed purposeful, every gesture a statement of endurance and courage. The professor watched silently, realizing that the lesson he had intended to teach had been completely rewritten by the presence of one human warrior. Ethan turned to address the students, his voice calm but firm as he explained that scars were not just physical reminders of battles fought, they were symbols of choice and resilience. They represented moments when humans faced pain and refused to yield when they encountered fear and chose action over hesitation when they were knocked down and rose again stronger than before. The aliens listened intently, trying to comprehend how a species could carry so much injury and yet remain unbroken. Their understanding of life and survival was being challenged in ways no textbook or simulation could have prepared them for. The professor stepped forward, finally speaking, his voice heavy with humility, acknowledging that he had underestimated humanity. He admitted that he had taught false limits, that humans could not regrow tissue, that they were fragile creatures that could be easily defeated. Yet here stood a living proof that humans healed in ways beyond biological understanding, that they could recover from injuries that would cripple others, and that their spirit was as powerful as their body. His words carried weight because they came from someone who had once claimed certainty, now confronted with undeniable truth. Ethan looked around at the students, seeing their eyes bright with a mixture of wonder and determination. He encouraged them to rethink their own assumptions about strength and resilience, to understand that survival was not just about technology or power, but about willpower, courage, and the ability to continue despite pain. He told them that humans were not invincible, but they were relentless, that they did not give up, that they did not measure life by absence of injury but by the ability to overcome it. Every scar was a lesson, every healed wound a story of triumph, and every human stood as a testament to endurance. The alien students began to approach Ethan, asking questions about techniques, about mental focus, about how to endure pain and recover faster. They wanted to learn not just the mechanics of healing, but the philosophy behind it. They wanted to understand how a species, so physically vulnerable in appearance, could dominate situations through sheer determination and adaptation. Ethan answered patiently, explaining that the human mind and spirit were as important as the body, that recovery was both physical and mental, that courage often healed faster than medicine, and that hope was a stronger force than fear. The students took notes eagerly, their understanding of humanity expanding with every word they heard. Korath, who had once mocked the human and his professor, now observed silently, realizing that he had been naive to assume superiority. He saw that strength was not only measured in size or weaponry, but in the refusal to surrender, in the ability to face mortality and rise again, in the quiet persistence to endure what others could not. The warrior before him was a living lesson that challenged every preconception and reshaped the way the galaxy would perceive humanity from that moment forward. Professor finally stepped back, nodding, once his eyes glistening with unspoken respect. He understood that this day had rewritten the curriculum, rewritten the expectations, and rewritten the understanding of a species he had thought he knew. Yet, it was not arrogance in Ethan that had changed them, but the silent strength in every scar, in every healed wound, in every breath he drew despite suffering. The human had left a mark far beyond flesh and tissue. He had etched into their minds a lesson about courage, resilience, and the indomitable nature of life. Ethan lowered his arms, finally allowing the weight of the lesson to settle over the arena. The students, the professor and Korath, all remained silent, absorbing what they had witnessed. The scars were no longer just marks on skin. They were emblems of strength, emblems of survival, and emblems of humanity itself. The room felt transformed, as if the presence of one human had shifted the very understanding of what it meant to endure, to survive, and to triumph. The aliens now understood that humans could not be measured by conventional rules, that their resilience was unmatched, and that the legacy of their scars would teach the galaxy a new lesson. And with that, the human warrior turned and walked away, each step measured and unyielding, leaving behind not just scars on his body, but a permanent impression on every mind in the chamber, and the story of his survival would echo in the hearts of those who witnessed it for generations. teaching that even when the body is broken, the spirit can remain unbroken, and that true strength is forged through endurance, courage, and the will to never surrender. The triumph beyond flesh. The chamber fell into an unusual quiet as Ethan stepped forward. His presence commanding yet calm, the alien students who had once doubted stared in disbelief at the human whose scars told stories of battles no simulator could recreate and injuries no advanced medicine could fully erase. Yet he stood unyielding and alive, his body a canvas of endurance, and his eyes burning with quiet fire. Every movement he made spoke of a life lived on the edge where danger was constant and yet surrender was never an option. The professor who had spent years teaching limitations now felt those lessons crumble before the undeniable truth that humans were capable of feats beyond calculation, beyond comprehension, and beyond expectation. Ethan spoke softly, but every word carried weight. He told them that humans measured life not in invincibility, but in how they responded to pain, how they chose courage over fear, how they transformed suffering into strength. He explained that a scar was never just a wound, it was evidence of choice. The decision to rise when the world wanted them to fall, the decision to endure when others would have given up, the decision to protect and survive. And the aliens listened, silently trying to grasp a concept that defied their logical programming, trying to understand how a species so physically fragile in appearance could embody such relentless force of spirit. The students began to gather closer, curiosity mixing with awe. They asked how humans recovered so quickly, how they fought on even when bodies were broken, how their minds remained sharp and unyielding. Ethan shared that the secret was simple and complex, at the same time that humans healed because they refused to accept defeat, that they nurtured hope in impossible situations, that they cultivated determination in the face of despair, that their survival was as much mental and emotional as it was physical. Every wound treated with care, every scar embraced as a lesson, every failure recognized as a path to mastery. Korath, who had once mocked, now watched silently, recognizing that he had misjudged an entire species. His pride replaced by reluctant respect. He realized that strength was not measured by size or firepower, but by endurance, by the refusal to break, by the unspoken promise to never surrender, even when survival seemed unlikely. The room itself seemed charged with a new understanding. The human warrior had altered perceptions, had rewritten expectations, and had planted seeds of awe and respect that would grow through generations of learning and observation. Ethan stepped back, finally letting the weight of the lesson settle into every mind. He had spoken, not with arrogance, but with truth, not with superiority, but with clarity. His scars had taught what words could not have shown, what lectures could never convey, that humanity endured because humanity refused to stop moving forward, because humanity converted injury into insight and pain into power. The professor lowered his head, acknowledging that all his teachings would have to be reconsidered, that the definition of strength had expanded beyond the limits he had once imposed, and that the human in front of them embodied a force the galaxy had never truly understood. The students watched him leave, each step purposeful, each breath steady and unwavering, and they understood that they had witnessed more than survival. They had witnessed a testament, a living proof that the human spirit could triumph where technology and biology alone would fail, that the scars humans bore were not weaknesses, but declarations that life could be faced and conquered, that every human carried within them a spark, that no alien weapon, no natural hazard, no impossible injury could extinguish. The chamber felt different, as if reality itself had shifted to accommodate this new understanding, and Ethan's legacy would linger long after he departed, teaching lessons of courage, of endurance, and of relentless will to all who encountered his story. And as he walked into the light, leaving shadows of awe and respect behind, the universe quietly acknowledged that humanity was more than flesh, more than scars, more than warriors. They were living proof that resilience was eternal, and strength was measured not in what could be destroyed, but in what refused to break, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The end.